So welcome to Transform Gov, the Digital Government podcast. And Transform Gov is part of the Ireland eGovernment Awards, and it's brought to you in association with Accenture. So I'm Maeve Neefsey, and today this episode is going to be exploring one of probably our most maybe contentious and emotive issues in Ireland, which is the planning process. And in particular, how we can speed up applications and those decisions around planning, as well as create more transparency. So joining me to go deeper into the complex topic is Seán Mahon. And Seán is MD of O'Connell Mahon, and he's also the president of the Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland, or the RIAI. And Seán, you're very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you, Maeve. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. I mean, it's such a big, complex subject, but let's start off with you a little bit in terms of your own background before we get into the nitty-gritty of planning and digitisation. So you're obviously an architect, but you have, I think, a bit of a passion around digitisation or the process of planning.
Yeah, I think certainly as architects, from the early stage in college in UCD, I studied in UCD, and at that time there was a great interest in urban design and transforming the city from what was a derelict city in the 1970s to look at, I suppose, how we as architects could contribute to the whole urban planning and development of the city. So I had a great interest in that from there. I went away and worked in London and Berlin for a few years, and then came back to Dublin at the beginning of the 1990s. And from there, I was worked on a lot of projects in the Temple Bar area, which also was very interesting in terms of the planning and urban design issues around that. I joined O'Connell Mahon. We set up our own company in 1998, and I've been managing director for the last 17 years there.
Very good. So, I mean, that's a huge change. I think people forget, particularly younger people, how Dublin was then. I mean, it was pretty unpleasant, really, in terms of there was a lot of underdevelopment in the city centre, a lot of empty spaces, and maybe not an appreciation as well for what a city could feel like.
Well, I think that's very true. There was an underappreciation of the historic core of the city and how amazing it was, really, because of all of the great cityscapes and the great urban landscapes of Dublin. We've been like from the Georgian Squares to the White Streets Commission work to the entirety of the quays, which were in really poor shape at the time. So there was a lot of thought given to how we needed to think again about our city and the way in which we plan and live and work in our city and design our city. So from there, I've always had a big interest in the whole way in which we conceive of planning. And I suppose going back to your earlier question, then more recently, we've been advocating very strongly for the possibilities that digital transformation allows us to rethink how we plan our cities for, to deliver, I suppose, better efficiencies in the system, to deliver less adversarial outcomes, and to deliver really for people a better quality environment in our cities and towns across the country.
I suppose there's a lot of people, isn't there, stakeholders involved in planning, because you've got, on the one hand, as you said, you've got the citizen, what's going to make it work for the citizen or the worker, generally what's moving through our city. And then you've also got the planning and the authorities trying to make sure what's built fits within what's needed for the city. Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the architects and the people and the engineers who are building everything. So there's a lot of moving parts. But I think, we can talk about those parts, but in terms of 3D, I think that's a bit of a game changer in terms of realising or being able to articulate really what people are planning.
I think it is on a number of fronts. I mean, firstly, it gives us the ability to, I suppose, to think and make a digital twin of our towns and our cities across the country in every region, in every local authority. We have the technology to do it. We know that there are great examples across the world of cities that are doing this and embracing this. And it can be done.
Maybe it's a good idea to tell people what a digital twin is. And I happen to know because we did another interview, which we'll talk about in a second. But what exactly is a digital twin?
So effectively, it's a digital model of the city. So in effect, we would like our city planners and city authorities and urban authorities to develop city models and city survey models, which are effectively digital twins of the city. And in doing so, then that enables a whole series of things to happen from that. First of all, as I said, we were talking earlier about the fact that all architects work in 3 dimensions anyway. We've been working in 3D for a long, long time. So we're working in 3-dimensional models and 3-dimensional space in the buildings we create and the visions we create at the moment. And so to enable us, to allow us that digital twin would allow us then to start putting our models into a digital city model. But there are two really more critical areas where that will enable huge progress, I think. One is that in developing a digital model of the city, it transformed the development plan into an urban design model that gives vision to what the future of the city is. So today we use 2D maps and we use big text documents in our city plans and county plans that are really impenetrable and I suppose don't give people a vision of where the next housing units are going to be, where the new schools are going to be, how they're going to be designed, how they're integrated in the town or city. And all of that is enabled through a digital platform. And the second piece, which is also critical, is it enables civic engagement with that at the early stages in the planning process.
I know that Fingal County Council, when they were doing the redevelopment for Balbriggan, used 3D models and they couldn't believe, the engagement, that people could actually very quickly understand what was being built because they could feel it and be in it. Because they used VR, they could actually have a reality of what it felt like. Yeah. And they thought, is this going, well, they didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But to your point, what they found was that people, A, were really engaged, but B, they were asking for more rather than saying no. Could we have more green spaces? Could we have more planting?
Yeah, well, we have really good evidence of that. And Balbriggan is a really good example. And I know they had certainly much greater civic engagement, as you say, on those issues. But across the world, we're finding that there is much greater civic engagement when people have access to the models. They understand, a three-dimensional drawing or vision or model, that it gives realism to something that is not real when it's on, a 200-page document or a 2D map with just coloured plans.
Which is hard to read, actually, unless you've been trained to look at a flat 2D map and actually understand what you're going to see. It's really hard to, as you say, it's impenetrable. And I suppose the other part is that you're not just seeing building in isolation if it's a digital twin for a town. You're seeing the pathways, the shops, the school, the roundabouts. You're getting a much deeper sense of what the community is going to look like.
All of those things are so vital and so critical because it's the spaces between buildings sometimes that people occupy and people move in. They move in the streets and the squares and the parks of our towns and cities. And they're the pieces that really then are brought to life in 3D models, that people understand not only where the building is and what it's like, but how the urban environment around that is conceived and how it's going to be in the future.
And is there a help in that for people beyond you and I, myself particularly, I'm the citizen who would not be the professional, but are you helping the planners as well? I mean, are they able to see things that they wouldn't have seen before in terms of making decisions?
I think there's no doubt you are, and on a whole series of different levels. I think one of the, not just in terms of looking at buildings as they're submitted for planning permission, but if you go back to the earlier stages in envisaging what the plan for the town or the city is going to be in the future. So it allows our planners and our architects and urban designers really to focus on forward planning, looking ahead to what people want and spend their times and energies, what they're trained to do. Planners are trained to plan for the future. Architects and urban designers were trained to imagine buildings and imagine spaces. And, we need to work together and bring in a much greater cohort of urban designers and architects into and working alongside and collaboratively with our planners to develop visions of what our future cities and towns are going to be. Okay. I think the other part about that, which is really helpful, is that you can have a discussion with the public about that at development plan stage, which is engaging with the public to understand what the public needs and what the public wants. So when the plans and are actually put in place, there's less I suppose, conflict in every single application as it comes into the planning authorities. I have huge sympathy for, the planners in local authority who are faced with assessing a huge volume of planning applications in a very adversarial format where you have objections and appeals and judicial reviews, and a huge amount of their time is spent in that area rather than planning for the future.
Well, that's really interesting because I know that the stats are still not good for An Bord Pleanála in terms of the backlog of planning coming through. And I suppose what I hadn't thought about was actually that their job could be sped up.
Absolutely.
Itself, and also, as you say, the process could be lightened in terms of people appealing or being upset about something or having some issue because they actually see what's being built.
That's right.
So, it's not only the backlog would clear in lots of ways.
Yeah. And I think, the efficiencies in the process obviously would be much greater. And there are huge problems in the planning process and the delays in that many people have in actually getting a planning permission. Firstly, there's the uncertainty of whether or not a permission or an application will comply with
Yes.
the plan. And secondly, the delays in actually getting through the process. I mean, it's really turning an awful lot of people off in investing in projects in the country. And it's also delaying and costing a huge amount of money for the public purse in investing in infrastructure, which is just taking much, much longer than it should take. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop us there because we're going to take a really short break, right, for the people who are important, which is our sponsors. And then we'll come back. And I think there's lots of things we can talk about around strategy, right? Overall strategy.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back again after a really short break, and I'm here with Seán Mahon from the RIAI, and we're talking about all things planning and all things digitisation in terms of that process. But I think we talked about other countries, and we'll touch on some of the countries that are maybe a little bit ahead of us, maybe very ahead of us actually in terms of digitising the process. The idea being to digitise planning because of the efficiencies it brings and the transparency. But do you think that we need to think more strategically about how we plan for the growth of our cities? Because the demand is there for housing, the demand is there for lots of other things. How do you think we should be thinking about it?
Well, that's a very good question, because actually I think we need to be thinking about it in much more longer term strategies in the first instance. Firstly, because we know our population is growing. We know there's demand there for, a huge number of housing units that are going to be required in the next 10 years, 15 years. We know that to support that, there's going to be a huge requirement for infrastructure, greater infrastructure. We know there's a huge issue around climate change that we have to address, and we have to have put in place long-term blocks and long-term thinking associated with that.
Are we good at that?
We're actually really poor at it. I mean, we're very good at developing maybe strategy documents and so on, but we're very, very poor in terms of implementing that. And I think if you think of infrastructure projects to begin with, we all know that it takes so long to develop Lewis projects or metro projects and so on, that really they're critical pieces of public infrastructure that will support an enormous amount of planning and development in the country in the future. So, we do need to be thinking long term in the first instance, and then beyond that, once we have a long term strategy, we need to be putting in the vision to support that. I think that when I was talking earlier about planning and the three-dimensional planning and models, I think it would really support also the investment of infrastructure such as not just transportation, but also the public infrastructure like streets and squares and parks and schools and so on that are needed to support our housing and our buildings in the future. So all of that has to be is something we need to have an about turn. I think it's quite a.
Is it a psychological shift or some a mindset, do you think, or is it just technology, or what do you think it is?
Well, I think what's really interesting now is that the technology is there to enable a transformational shift that we have no doubt has the capacity to drive, transformational change in terms of the quality of outcomes for people in the future and the efficiencies in the delivery of the process. I mean, those two things on their own, delivering better quality outcomes and delivering them more efficiently. We need to grab that opportunity when it's there. And you were referencing other cities and other authorities that are doing that at the moment, and they're achieving really good results, I have to say.
And I suppose within digitisation, over and over again, it's not just throwing people at the job. Digitisation can make huge efficiencies where you don't have to. I know in Bord Pleanála had to take in a lot of extra people to try and get rid of that backlog. But from what I've read and what I've seen, it looks like technology within the planning process itself could really speed up a lot of the work, or certainly help with some of the backlog. I mean, am I wrong?
I think there's no doubt there's a real opportunity there. Like, take for example, when somebody is making a planning application, if my company or any other person is making a planning application for large buildings at the moment, we have to provide an enormous amount of data to support that application. Now, if you had digital twins of models of the cities, and for which the data is made available to people, so that you're doing it once for the entire city, and then the public and the people involved in developing the city will have the opportunity to use that to enable their planning application. It will, first of all, speed up and make much more efficient.
Give me an example of how they'd use it. What would that mean?
So take, for example, if you're building a building in the middle of the city, and it's the entire model of that part of the city would be in place and would be available for you to stitch and put your three-dimensional model into it. So I'll be making a three-dimensional model of the building that I'm designing and placing it within the actual city model that's there. I don't then have to make the entire model of that city quarter myself.
Okay.
And everybody else would be in the same position. So there are much greater efficiencies there. It's also, from the planning side, it's a really good model to have because it enables the planners who are assessing these applications to I suppose, be more have much more data available to them. Because
I presume they could play with it as well, because let's say you put in a new building, let's pretend it's a shopping centre. Yeah. I presume the planner, if the twin is already there, the new building concept is let's say dumped, I'm sure that's not the right word, into the scape. I presume they can then play with how would the traffic flow be? How would we make sure that they're piped for water and all the utilities?
Absolutely. All of those things are then would become assessed in one model rather than being assessed separately in every single application that's made. And I think at the moment, we know, and as I was saying earlier, we are all working in three dimensions. Architects and engineers have been working in 3D models for 10 or 15 years at least now. So the technology we have available is very simple. It can just be placed, as you say, in the greater city model.
So do you have to go back into 2D then when you're putting in an application?
Unfortunately,
we do. So you're working in 3D,
yeah.
And then you have to output to 2D to be able to submit.
That's right.
So that's madness. We'll have to.
I mean, when you say it like that, it's just, it doesn't really make sense. It really doesn't make any sort of sense. And I think, as I was saying earlier, we're trained to think in 3D anyway, and we like working in 3D because it gives you better pictures and better understanding of what it is you're working with, whether you're looking at the corner of a building or whether you're seeing how does it sit in the context of the street that runs by it. All of those things are much more, you enable much better understanding, I suppose, of the buildings. And
I mean, even for ourselves, there's a very big block that was being developed near us, and we thought, it's going to overshadow this. And of course, it's actually much nicer than we thought because that's that lack of knowledge. So, I mean, I'm sure that's replicated, and that must slow down because people are assuming things and then make an objection, perhaps that's not real.
That's right. Yeah.
But look, I've got one more break to make, which you have to do because we've got a very important event coming up. It's the Ireland Government Awards. So I'm going to take a quick break so we can give you some information about entry because it's now open. Okay, it's time to stop putting it off. If you're thinking of entering the Ireland Government Awards, now is the time.
Yeah, don't wait. Get your entries in before the rush. The deadline is coming down the tracks. It'll be June the 2nd.
And believe us, there is a project for every single innovation, like digital inclusion, AI in local government, AI, and we've even got a category for digital projects that don't fit into any category. So it really is one for everybody in the audience.
And this is not a moneymaker. Entry is FREE, free, and it's about you and your team. Your project deserves to be recognised. That's what the eGovernment Awards are all about. So go to our website, digitalgovawards.com, and enter, where we've made it so easy.
And of course, don't forget, this is all thanks to Accenture, our fantastic sponsor. So we're back, and we were talking then about obviously enabling the process of planning and decision making and creation really through technology. But there's a big shift, isn't there, in terms of what other countries have done. So we're not the first to think about this as something that we need to do strategically, right? So where would you think the leaders are? I know you mentioned Helsinki earlier on.
Yeah, I think the Scandinavians have always been leaders in this area. And just, when I remember when I graduated from college in the 1980s, I was working in Stockholm for a short period of time. And even at that stage, this was prior to digitisation of design process, Stockholm had a big 3D model in timber of the city that was in the planning office that people used, and they had to make a physical model to actually place in the city model. But they had that idea that you would always use these models to engage with the public in 3 dimensions with each application. Now, of course, that's moved on a lot. But cities like Stockholm and Helsinki and Copenhagen have really engaged in the 3-dimensional process. We had visitors over from the Helsinki city authorities recently, lecturing at a conference we had in urbanism in Dublin Castle. And they were talking about the fact that they have modelled the entire city in 3 dimensions, as we've spoken about earlier.
I feel like I'm walking into the Matrix now. You can go in and see the cities and feel the cities.
Well,
right?
that's what they want to happen. And then they make all that data available to the public when they want to engage with the planning authorities and when they want to develop schemes and plans for their own part of, or their own buildings, or their own part of the city. So all of that is transformational in the way in which it is allowing a much more coherent view of the future plan of the city, but also going back to the much greater civic engagement that we talk about.
And I presume that the process of actually doing the application can all be done electronically. Is that the case?
Well, yes, to a certain extent, but it's only very, very recently, like literally within the last year, that we have stopped issuing planning applications in paper format within many of the regions, such as in Dublin City.
Okay.
It's quite extraordinary, really, to think that
of such an important issue, a burning issue, really, for Ireland in terms of housing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd have to make hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages of documents and multiply them by 10 in many cases to deliver to the planning office. Now that has been digitised, but it's really just the documentation process that has been digitised to date. What we're talking about is digitising the entire city model, which is a much bigger change that really needs to happen.
But you've done it once and then you're adding to it incrementally, but it could have a huge impact, right, in terms of just everybody tapping into that model. Actually, I read this morning that, or a couple of weeks ago, the Dublin City Council are doing a partnership with the AI lab in Trinity College Dublin and the Adapt Centre, and they're looking at using AI. Is kind of a more granular level, but to try and look at all of the backlog of applications and be able to very quickly triage the most important priorities up to the top of the list. Yeah. So they create some sort of criteria so that you're not just doing it chronologically, whose email came in first. I think that could make quite a big difference in terms of speeding things up. It
could, but think how much greater they could do that if the information they were receiving was digitised in the first place, rather than just a PDF of a document, which is what we currently have to submit. But I think all of those changes, Maeve, we would support and encourage people to progress. So what Dublin City Council is doing in that area, that's good. We want to see people engaging and utilising the digital system more.
I know that I'm going to touch on a subject slightly off the planning process because you've been so involved yourself and your practice in healthcare projects, because you were involved in the Children's Hospital, a maternity hospital, rehabilitation hospital, national programme for radiation and oncology. So is there digitisation happening in that world? Are you seeing that adaptation there?
Oh, there's huge change is happening in that area, and it's really interesting the way in which it's happening. In the first instance, I suppose, a couple of the changes, to give you some examples, are, we are working in 3D models now, but we're sharing that model in a space where the engineers and the architects and all of the disciplines who are working on designs are working in one model, which is really good. There's what's called a BIM system, obviously, that people may or not be familiar with, is building information modelling. But then when you get to construction stage, contractors are much more engaged in that process now and are really starting to pick up on and use the model to actually plan and coordinate the building installation.
The implementation,
and so in recent projects now, we're looking to ensure that that the building contractor, when they complete the building, will actually build a digital twin of the building as they're developing it. So when they're picking the lift that goes into the building, they're actually getting from the lift manufacturer the digital model of the lift and dropping it into the design model, and all of the same things with every single building piece in the building, and then that can be actually that can be tagged, obviously, so then it can be an amazing tool then for the ongoing management of the building and the ongoing technical management of the building and facilities management of the building for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
I presume if an extension or a new wing is to be put into an existing model like that, it's much quicker, much faster, much less expensive if you already have an existing model.
Well, having an existing model is a fantastic place to start with, because you completely understand everything that's already in the building, and this is right down to the ducts that are going across the ceiling and the pipes that are running into the hot water systems and the fire alarm systems that are all hidden. All of that is digitised in the model, and then you can pick up on it and know where you have to connect into it and know where you don't. Where you can and can't work alongside it.
Well, looking to the future, right? And in a way, kind of tell us exactly what you'd like. What would you like seeing happening with the whole planning and build process that you think would really make a big difference?
Well, I think, as I said at the beginning, Maeve, I think we have a great opportunity to use digitisation to actually make the transformational changes that we've been asking for. We at the RIAI, we have a new planning and development management policy that has just been launched this year. There are a number of things in that, but the three big things that we would like to see are much greater long-term strategy in delivering our development plans, that we're looking ahead to 20, 30, 40 years rather than just looking to 5 years or 10 years as we have done. That we would have digital 3D models of all our cities and all our towns put in place as a huge change and which will really drive efficiencies in our planning process and drive quality, as I said earlier, and then using that to give much greater civic engagement in the process, which would, we think, I suppose, not only just give better comfort and better engagement in the public to ensure that their voices are heard in the process, but lead to much less adversarial process and outcomes in the planning process.
And I mean, I'm thinking of the big, town planning, whatever, city planning, places like Paris, and who are so far ahead in terms of how they thought. But there is a benefit, isn't there, in terms of if we all know what the city's or future is going to look like, I presume it means that then the architects and the investors can say, well, actually, I'm attracted to that idea, that they're going to need some infrastructure there, or they're going to need homes for people there. So does that kind of happen when you have a much more clear view of what your strategic plan is for the city?
You're absolutely right. That's exactly the type of thing that will enable much greater certainty in the process, that will deliver, we would hope, much greater investment, much greater kind of cohesion in the process. So people understand exactly, as you say, what the planning parameters are, and they can see them there. And remember, not only that, then they understand what the long-term strategy is going to be, that they know where the next rail network is coming in, they know where the next school is coming in. That's what countries like Denmark and Sweden and Norway are really good at actually driving public infrastructure ahead of the individual houses and process, but it's all to a coherent plan in the first place.
Okay. So are you positive, do you think, about the future?
Well, I think I am. I'm really positive about the opportunity that's there at the moment to really make a change that would really, I suppose, in the long run, give us a much greater, sustainable and resilient cities and towns for our people and for the public in the future. That's what we really want. But I think we're at a bit of a crossroads too. I think we need to embrace this process. And I know for every big change that you make, there's obviously a lot of people will have worries about the consequences of change. But we do need to get over that. We really do, and just embrace this opportunity that we have to make a better future for everybody.
Good. Well, look, on that positive note, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And it's fascinating to hear what your thoughts are. Maybe you'll come back when there's some other changes going on, and we can say, look what happened as a result.
Thank you very much. I'd be delighted to.
Well, before I go, I'm going to thank a few people here, really the team behind Transform Gov. So the studio manager, who's Peter Rice, the video editor is Neil Horner, sound engineer Lee Brennan, videographer Louis Griffin, and of course, finally, thank you to South Dublin Podcast Studio. Goodbye.